In this video, we'll learn how to play the chess variant Chennis. Chennis was invented in 2021 by Couch Tomato, and this variant is particularly interesting because it combines various rules and aspects from three major types of chess, shogi, and Xiangqi. In particular, this game is based on a variant of shogi called Kyoto Shogi, and Kyoto Shogi is a very unique variant, and I can't do it justice other than showing you how it plays real quickly. Okay, so here's Kyoto Shogi. I'm just using international pieces just so it makes sense for anyone who's not so familiar with shogi. Kyoto Shogi is played on a 5x5 board, and the funny thing about it is that every time you move a piece, it changes to the other side. So if I move this piece over here, it flips to the knight behind it. And as you move these pieces and go back and forth, they just keep flipping back and forth. Now also like shogi, when you capture a piece, it goes to your hand, and when it's in your hand, you could drop them on the board. Like that. So it's a very chaotic, but also very fun game. There will be a how to play video for Kyoto Shogi, which details the rules in more depth, so please stay tuned for that when it comes. So now back to Chennis. Chennis was created as a reaction to Kyoto Shogi, so there are some problems with the game that we realized after playing a bunch of times. It is certainly fun, but it's quite imbalanced and strongly favoring the first player. In fact, Fairy Stockfish has near completely solved the game. On top of that, it is a shogi variant, and so it uses primarily shogi pieces, which may be alien to a lot of chess players. And so the goal for Chennis was to create a variant that was basically like Kyoto Shogi, but using chess pieces. And in the process, in order to keep the feel of Kyoto Shogi, some restrictions to the board had to be made. The king could only stay in certain parts of the board, which ended up resembling a tennis court. And in fact, the king also had to be diagonally across from the other king, which also resembles a tennis court. And so it wasn't until the rules were actually decided that the game decided to take a tennis theme, and that's how Chennis was born. Its name being a portmanteau of tennis and chess. And so let's go over the rules now. Starting with the board itself, the board is slightly complicated in that it's divided into multiple sections. So we'll look at this diagram here. You have white's court, black's court, two sidelines, and the net. And these areas basically define how the king can move. So each king can only move in their own court or up to the net. So both kings can share the net, but they can't go any further than that. And again, they also can't go into the sidelines. The goal of the game is still to checkmate the king, but now the king is just in a more restricted area, which makes it easier to checkmate. Now, much like Kyoto Shogi, whenever you capture a piece, that piece actually goes into your hand. Now, in the spirit of Kyoto Shogi, there are two major rules to keep track of. One is that each piece is actually two-sided. So here you could see for white, you have the piece that's quote-unquote face up, and then you have the piece that's behind it, which is marked in red. And same thing for black, you have the piece that's currently playing as black, and then you have the blue piece behind it. That's what it'll turn to after it moves. So for example, if this pawn moves, it'll turn into a rook after that, and every time a rook moves, it'll turn into a pawn after that. These pieces will keep on flip-flopping between their two sides every time they move. Now the second part that's like Kyoto Shogi is that when you capture pieces, they go into your hand, and then they can be dropped back onto the board as one of your moves. Now remember how the king is restrained to their courts and the net? All the other pieces can move anywhere on the board, including the sidelines, and they could also be dropped anywhere on the board on their move. And when they're dropped on the board, they have the option of being dropped onto either of their sides. So having a piece in your hand is actually very dangerous because it's basically having two different types of pieces. Aside from that, the only other general rule is that stalemate is a loss for the king that can't move, whereas in chess it's a draw. Okay, so with all the general rules out of the way, let's talk about the actual pieces. First off is the king. The king is special in that it's the only piece that actually doesn't flip between two sides. It always keeps the same move, which is actually quite convenient. And it moves just like the king in chess. It moves one square in any direction around it. The rest of the pieces are paired, and there's a general rule to keep in mind for each of these pieces. Each pair of pieces has a short range side and a long range side. And so some of these pieces may already be familiar to you. For example, the bishop and the rook. These are both long-ranged pieces, and the knight will also count as a long-ranged piece. In addition to that, the way the pieces attack are opposite from each other. So, for example, the rook attacks as a straight piece, while the pawn, just like in chess, attacks diagonally. So, in general, a piece that attacks diagonally will swap to a piece that attacks orthogonally. The main exception is the knight and its counterpart. So with that said, let's look at the pieces. I was already talking about the rook and pawn, so let's talk about those. The pawn is just like in chess. It can move one square forward and attack diagonally forwards. Unlike the standard chess pawn, it doesn't have a double step in the beginning, and it also can't promote at the end. So if for some reason you drop the pawn into the last line, well, let's just say that pawn's going to be stuck until it gets captured. Now the pawn flips into a rook, and the rook is exactly like in chess. It moves any number of squares, left, right, up, or down. Next up, let's look at the soldier. The soldier is actually a piece straight from Xiangqi, Chinese chess, and it can move one square sideways or one square forwards. And unlike the pawn, it also attacks how it moves. The bishop is exactly like in chess. It moves any number of squares diagonally in any direction. Next up we have the mayor, and if you'll notice, the mayor has a very similar symbol to the king, and that's because it moves exactly like a king, except losing the mayor doesn't lose you the game. So it moves one square in any direction. The complement to the mayor is the knight, and it moves exactly like the chess knight. It leaps in an L shape to any of these 8 squares. And notice if you put the knight and the mayor together, they make the knight-mayor piece, and it's truly a nightmare because this is actually the strongest combination of pieces in the game. The knight is very flexible when you drop it, and the mayor is very good at mating the king. Anyways, let's get to the last pair of pieces. This piece is the fares, and it just moves one square diagonally in any direction. Its counterpart is the cannon, and for anyone familiar with Xiangqi, this is the cannon from Xiangqi. If you're not, then let me explain. The cannon can move without attacking, just like a rook. So it could go up, down, left, or right, any number of squares. But to attack, it actually has to jump over a piece in the way. So let's say there's a black piece over here. Now this cannon jumps over this fares to attack the black fares. It doesn't matter what piece it jumps over, it could be white or black. So for example, and so this cannon could jump over this black fares to capture the black mayor. And those are all the pieces. Now remember in the beginning of the video how I said this game has elements of chess, shogi, and xiangqi? Well, the rules are very much like Kyoto Shogi, but a good number of the pieces are from chess, and then also a few of these pieces, for example, the fares, the cannon, and the soldier are from xiangqi. The fares is the advisor from Xiangqi, by the way, if you didn't make that connection. Another Xiangqi connection is that in Xiangqi, the king is constrained to its palace. And in Chennis, the king is also confined to its area of the court here. Now speaking of the king being confined to its part of the court, this brings up an interesting mating pattern. Let's say we have this endgame situation here where the black king has ventured all the way up to the net, and the white player has a mayor in hand, and we're going to drop that mayor right here to check the king. Well, the king has nowhere to go but over here, and so he's going to do that. Now, on white's next move, white can move the king up here, and this will be checkmate. Now, why can the king do that? Normally, 2 kings aren't able to touch in chess, right? Well, the black king can only go up to the net, so the black king can't really access white's side of the court, whereas the white king can still also go up to the net. So white's king is actually threatening this square, and that square, and the rook is covering all the squares behind the black king. And so we have the funny situation where a king can mate another king. And those are the rules for Chennis. The gameplay is really quick, so please feel free to give it a try. It's my recommendation to go back and forth with one player playing as white, the next game as black. And if you're really into it, you could tally it like a tennis match. So play a certain number of games, and when you win a certain number of games, you win a set. And with a certain number of sets, you have to win a match. Anyways, I hope this has been interesting, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please don't forget to like and subscribe.